Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of Cave Regions of the Ozarks and Black Hills by Luella Agnes Owen, published in 1898. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 3, Episode 44. Content note: if by some chance you feel inspired to investigate any locations mentioned, please keep in mind that they may not be currently accessible to the public. Some are operated as commercial caves and have been noted as such where appropriate. This book was written quite some time ago and therefore does not necessarily reflect current-day outlooks and language choices. The scientific texts may use outdated terminology or be inaccurate in light of more recent discoveries. This podcast was created primarily to help you relax and to entertain you. The texts are chosen for their ability to charm and interest you, rather than for educational purposes. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you have a moment to leave us a review on iTunes, it would help other listeners find us. You can also hear our episodes on YouTube. If you are listening there, please like our episodes and leave a comment for us. We'd love to hear from you. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. Chapter 12, Wind Cave Concluded. Garden of Eden, the Glacier, and Ice Palace. There is yet another long and charming line of travel open to those who have sufficiently steady heads and light feet to suffer no loss of confidence or depression of spirit when mounting the steep stairway whose limit seems lost in the dark distance above. There being but a single entrance, a repetition of the worn and ancient statement that all roads lead to Rome means that many journeys may be taken in Wind Cave, but all must have the same beginning. In the tourist season, the guides have not time during the day to bring out specimens to supply the demand, so on this account night trips are of frequent occurrence, and on these occasions the number of persons in all that vast space seldom exceeds half a dozen, but their voices and laughter and the blows of their hammers can be heard at greater distances than would seem possible, and give an agreeable sense of companionship, yet the voice does not travel by any means so far as in other caves. The evening we were to make the long trip just mentioned, our guide being ready before any others had gone in, we started the advance on the 97 miles of enclosed, unoccupied space, and had almost reached the level of the bridal chamber when he remembered a forgotten and necessary roll of magnesium ribbon, for which it was needful to return to the office in the upper building. I sat down on the lowest step of the great stairway to wait, and for a very short time was entirely alone in the largest cavern in the world, excepting the Mammoth Cave of Kentucky. The unexpected experience seemed suddenly to become one of the great events of a lifetime, and was unmarred by the disturbing apprehensions of any possible danger. The entire absence of sound was indescribably awe-inspiring as, quote, strata overleaping strata from the center to the crust rose alp high in molten silence as the dead rise from the dust. End quote. But the feeling of complete isolation from the living world would not require an unlimited time to merit the one word, horrible. Even some peril with ample companionship would be more agreeable, while it is a curious fact that the combination of companionship with silence is charming. On the occasion of one visit to the cave, it was painful to observe the actual suffering of a lover of quiet from the good-natured but heedless chatter of two of the party. Presently, steps on the stairs broke the stillness. A glimmer of light pierced the intense darkness that surrounded the circle of one candle, and the upper world seemed not so far away. The interrupted journey was resumed, the route being that already described as far as the Confederate crossroads, where this time we go straight on in the main fissure instead of turning into the cross crevice as was done before. We were overtaken by the specimen party and recognized the three laughing young girls only by their voices, as in full suits of overalls and white duck caps they looked like boys. Those who reside near the large caves have overcome their objection to this costume, as it gives much greater freedom and ease of movement, besides being a decided economy. Feminine garments are so easily destroyed, but for artistic effect the substitute cannot conscientiously be recommended. Beyond the crossroads, the first chamber is Breckenridge Gallery, a long, rambling hall in which are combined the attractions already past and those yet to come, but having no striking feature predominating to give special character other than the grandeur of extreme roughness, which is also the quality most observed on passing into the stone quarry, where great accumulations of blocks seem waiting preparation for shipment. The next open country is protected from public trespass by the garden wall, which appears to have been well built in the long ago by masons properly trained in their craft, and extends at a uniform height to the fallen flats, where the floor is covered with slabs of enormous size that have fallen from the ceiling since water occupation ceased, as is clearly shown by the sharp edges and surfaces entirely unworn. The journey now becomes more interesting as the cliff climber's delight is reached, and we go steadily up the long flights of stairs until visions of St. Peter begin to rise, and we wonder which way the key will turn. Near the top is a handsome growth of snow-white mold, hanging in long draperies behind the ladder, or spread like on asparagus burn, flattened against the rock. Arrived at the top limits of the stairs, the ascent is by no means finished, but continues through three large chambers known as 5 Points, the Omaha Bee Office, named by one of the staff of that well-known journal, and the WCTU Hall, dedicated to the service of the organization by one of its workers. At last, the upward journey is ended at the silent lake in the first or highest level. This, as has already been observed, is the only body of water now standing in the cave, and is not more than 10 feet long by 6 in width and 12 inches deep. The scanty volume is maintained by the very limited inflow of acidulated percolating water which reaches the small receiving basin charged with calcium carbonate. And being cold, the charge is being precipitated on the bottom instead of forming a crust over the surface, as in former times when the controlling influence was a degree of heat sufficient to sustain solid matter without disturbing motion. Rising above the silent lake is the glacier, its moist surface suggesting that the lake is fed by a slight thaw, while the perpendicular front at the water's edge gives the impression of a berg having recently broken off and floated away. The glacier flows between two high walls of dark rock, and the steep incline of perhaps 70 feet, covered with a smooth deposit of calcite and shining with moisture, has the appearance of ice and is as uninviting for a climb. The top is connected with the roof above by a group of short and, for this region, heavy columns of dripstone, the oldest formation of that character in the cave. An occasional overflow of the lake passes out to one side, then turns and goes under the glacier, where its first few feet of descent are called the pearl beds, where a variety of water-polished pebbles are being coated over and cemented together with calcite crystal. From the glacier down to the lowest level of the cave by another route than that taken for the ascent, there is abundant evidence that at one time this portion of the cave was subject to excessively violent activity, and if studied with a view to the penetration of the principle of geyser action, offers many interesting and valuable suggestions that can be added to and expanded into definite theories in connection with the balance of the cave. All important requirements are clearly shown. At a short distance from the glacier is a small circular dome called the picture gallery, which evidently was shaped by water forced up from below. The descent from here takes us into the St. Louis Tunnel, a long rough passage leading down into the great cathedral, by the still descending irregularities of which we finally reach the Garden of Eden, the objective point of a favorite tourist route, but usually approached from the opposite direction. It is a large chamber of very irregular shape, with an extremely uneven ceiling, dipping nearly to the floor and rising suddenly to distant heights, while every portion of all the varied surfaces glitters with a mass of frostwork in every form it is known to have assumed. The banks of orange buds in different stages of expansion being exceptionally handsome. A portion of this wonderful room especially admired is Cupid's alcove, where the frost is tinged with a pinkish flush from the brilliant paint clay captured in minute particles by the vapors. The whole room is a marvel of loveliness, but unfortunately visitors have wrought such noticeable change that wire screening must be placed before the general admittance of large parties can be resumed. Passing out and down to a lower level, by way of Jacob's Well, we find the source of that magnificent abundance of frostwork to be in the Chamber of Forbidden Fruit, where a yellow calcite floor crust indicates the surface level of water diminishing in volume by evaporation long after the upward flow had forever ceased, and from which the rising vapor ascended to decorate the Garden of Eden just described. But since this water completely disappeared, leaving in evidence only the record-bearing crust, a percolating drip has prepared indisputable proof of the remote distance of that time by depositing on the crust great clusters of luscious fruits, chiefly cherries, which appear to have been carelessly tossed down in heaps, but are firmly fixed in place. The onward journey continues up and down through Beacon Heights, a large chamber which imitates Rocky Mountain scenery, and terminates at the Corkscrew Path, which, as the name indicates, is a spiral path winding down like a great stairway against the wall of an approximately circular chamber, which is perhaps the highest in the cave, and shows the most violent water action. The plunging torrent rushed on from here to tear out the heavy rock and form the next chamber, known as Dante's Inferno, whence, its force being divided, it went more gently in various directions. And by one of these passages we now re-enter the main route of travel once more, and finally return to the face of the earth, wondering if it will be possible to so describe those wonderful scenes as to represent with even a limited degree of fairness or justice the awe-inspiring grandeur of the entire trip, or the perfection of fragile loveliness formed and preserved as by special miracles in the Garden of Eden. One peculiarity of this great journey was that the boxwork, so abundant in other portions of the cave, was here conspicuously absent. The Crystal Palace. Another route in Wind Cave is that to the Crystal Palace, which, although the shortest, is the one most seldom taken by visitors because of a certain amount of difficulty and discomfort being unavoidable. Only a portion of the great stairway below the entrance is descended, when we abandon it and climb into a hole in the side wall of the narrow passage, from which point to the end of the trip our feet prove to be merely encumbrances. The space crawled into and through widens sufficiently in several places to form chambers of good size, but the height of the ceiling is nowhere more than 3 feet, and most of it only 2 or even less. The rough rock floor is partly carpeted with patches of loose, moist clay, which is the means of our becoming as grimy as tramps, and its source is readily accounted for by an examination of the ceiling. This is easily made while resting one skinned elbow at the expense of the other. The word abraded is inadequate where anything approaching real cave study is attempted. The boxwork of the ceiling has almost entirely lost its crystallization, and is as ready to crumble as the enclosed clay, which is still retained because it had not yet reached the necessary point of deterioration to be carried out before the great volume of water required for that service retired from this high level of the cave. When finally reached, the Crystal Palace proved worthy of the effort, its decoration being entirely of dripstone and very beautiful, although on too small a scale to be compared with similar work in many caves. It is merely an attractive extra in Wind Cave, and not one of the important attractions that give the cave the rank that may have a few equals but no superiors. The first room is scarcely more than 12 feet in either direction and not quite 6 feet high. The glassy ceiling is thickly studded with small stalactites from 2 to 18 inches in length, and mostly of the hollow, pipe stem variety, from which the surplus drip rests in white masses on the clean floor around a central bowl of good clear water. Down the middle of the wall, directly opposite the entrance, a rushing little white cascade has congealed, and on either side, just under the ceiling, is a hollowed-out nook closely set with short stalactites and small columns, all pure white. Nearby, but not connected, is another room too well filled to permit an entrance, but a portion of the wall having been carried out, a satisfactory view is not denied. Here the floor rises to within 3 feet of the ceiling, and the deposit is much heavier, so that many fine columns rise from bases that spread and meet or overlap. If the cave had no greater claim to notice than these small drip rooms, it would still be worthy of a visit. The effort to secure flashlight pictures could only be considered successful because there are none better to be had. The atmosphere of Wind Cave is marvelously fresh and pure, and possesses in a high degree the invigorating quality which in most caves renders unusual exertion not only possible, but agreeable as well. In all the chambers and passages there is little change in the quality of the air, and thorough tests with a standard thermometer showed the variations on the different levels, from the highest to the lowest, to be about 2 degrees, but on different days the range was from 45 degrees to 52 degrees Fahrenheit. This curious state of affairs someone else will have to explain. The only forms of life ever found in Wind Cave are a small fly and the mountain rat. While visiting the cave, everyone connected with it was most kind and obliging, especially in showing those beautiful and difficult portions that few visitors are so fortunate as to see. While this is very far from being a complete description even of the parts visited, it will serve to show what a truly grand cavern is located at the south end of the Black Hills. The elevation at Hot Springs is 3,400 feet, and that of the entrance to the cave is 4,040 feet. A source of disappointment in connection with Wind Cave is that its fine scenery cannot be effectively pictured. Chapter 13. The Onyx Caves. Northwest of Hot Springs, there is a group of 3 onyx caves, the distance to them being estimated at from 7 to 10 miles, if the party does not get lost, which is the usual fate of those who dispense with the service of a driver familiar with the country. In going, the longer way, over the hilltops, claims a preference on account of distant views with favorable light. When the Onyx Cave Ranch is reached, its scenery is found to be charming, with an ideal log house overlooking the canyon, and itself overlooked by the rising slope of the wooded hill. The entrance to the cave is in the opposite wall of the canyon, and is covered by a small cabin, at the door of which the view demands a pause for admiration. Then the party disappears down a narrow, rough, sloping passage of sufficient height for comfort to none but know the value of comparative degrees. It soon appeared, however, that personal comfort would travel only a short distance. The mud increased with every step, and in its midst was a small hole through which it was necessary to pass to the next lower level. This hole being so small, and its walls slanting, the only way to accomplish the first half of the descent was to sit down in the mud and slide, stopping halfway to examine a fine ledge of beautiful striped onyx, white and brownish pink, the first outcrop in the cave, but in the next level it is seen in rich abundance and variety, the colors being red, black, and white, brown in several shades, and pure white. All are handsome and of commercial quality and hardness, and just above them is a ledge of fine blue marble. The next chamber is called the Badlands, on account of a certain resemblance to that desolate region. The way into it is through the Devil's Corkscrew, a most uninviting passage because it stands on end and is about 12 feet deep, with circular, perpendicular walls discouragingly free of prominent irregularities. But careful study reveals a few available crags and rough edges by which the descent is made. Fortunately, the party decreased in size just within the entrance. Climbing up into a hole in the wall of this room with no little difficulty, the aerial lake is the reward of a breathless upward struggle, and a satisfying one. The lake is very small, but under its clear surface can be seen numerous growing deposits of calcite, while the roof of onyx gleams with a mass of small white stalactites. Returning again to the main route and traveling to the end of a short passage, we beheld the entrance to Red Hall, a piece of rope ladder dangling halfway down a perpendicular wall, the other half having no help whatever. The way was clear so far as the length of the ladder, and with trust in the future, soon learned in cave work, that distance was at once passed, and sitting on the very narrow ledge to cogitate on the possibility of further progress, Mr. Sidey solved the problem by suggesting, rather doubtfully, that the easiest way would be to drop off and allow him to interrupt the fall. This method had twice proved the only means of advance in Wind Cave, and can be termed rapid transit. The walls of Red Hall are of stratified limestone variegated with patches of red rock and clay of the same hue. It is the highest chamber in the cave, and probably the largest. A hole in the wall at the floor level, near the entrance to the passage beyond, gives a glimpse of the cave river flowing on a slightly lower level, not over 2 feet below the floor we stand on. The water is said to have a depth of 15 feet, and a rock thrown in gave back the sound of a splash into water not shallow. Entering the passage already referred to, its dimensions decreased to a crawl and then to a squeeze, so that most of its length was taken in a very humble position, which permitted no regard to be paid to the ample mud or little pools of water that must be serenely dragged through, as if carrying them away were an agreeable privilege. Even a muddy passage ends in time, and at last we gained a standing point, and after a short climb were in Fairy's Palace, a marvel of dainty beauty, and worthy of the distasteful trip just taken. We stood in a narrow passage that divided the small chamber like the central aisle of a cathedral, above which the white roof formed a Gothic arch from which depended countless little stalactites and draperies, while on either side, 6 feet above the passage, was a floor of onyx supporting exquisite columns of which the highest are not more than 3 feet. Only a short distance from the fairy's palace is the almost equally beautiful ethereal hall, and connecting the two, I had the pleasure to discover a small arched passage more beautiful than either. Although much of the cave was still not visited, the long drive to town demanded a return to the surface, but several stops were made on the way to admire masses of onyx and groups of curious forms in deposits of that fine stone. One high, crooked chimney above the corkscrew is especially fine, and correspondingly difficult for a grown person weighted down with garments dripping mud and water. But Kimball Stone, our boy friend, scampered up like a squirrel. 2 of the Onyx Caves had not been seen at all, and Mr. Sidey expressed special regret on account of the latest discovery, as no woman had ever yet entered it. But the sun was low in the west, and the road had some dangerous points that must be passed before dark. So the reeking skirt was removed, and without waiting to dry by the great fire kindled for the purpose, we hurried off, promising to return if possible, and carrying treasures in specimens, besides an ancient lemon, which may not be called a fossil, since soft substances are said not to fossilize. But however that may be, this is a perfect lemon whose particles have been replaced with the lasting rock, in the same way as the numerous cycad trunks in the same region have been preserved to prove to us conclusively that formerly the region flourished under tropical conditions and supported an abundant animal life of tropical nature and habits. Soon after leaving the ranch, we descended by a sort of goat trail road into a grandly beautiful canyon, along the bed of which the road continues until it flows out as the water did in ages gone. By this time it had become quite dark, and the chill of the northwest night formed a combination with saturated clothing that cannot be highly recommended as a pleasure, but the natural chivalry which prompted our young escort to insist on lending his own coat, and his evident disappointment that the sacrifice was not allowed, afforded a pleasure that will continue. The White Onyx Cave. A few days later, it was convenient to return to the Onyx Cave Ranch with the special object of entering the newest cave, which could be done with the assistance of 70 feet of rope. While necessary preparations were pending, a walk up the canyon was proposed. At a distance of perhaps a quarter of a mile above Onyx Cave, evidence was seen of a very remarkable form of ancient life. It is not the usual few bones, but is a cast in the rock of the canyon bed of an animal clothed in its flesh. The appearance of the head, neck, body, and wings is preserved, but the tail and 4 limbs have been carried away by eroding waters which even now have not quite forsaken the canyon. The containing stratum is not seen in the canyon wall, and near the lower end of the canyon a fine white sandstone crops out beneath. We ask, Was the canyon cut to its full depth while yet a Cretaceous sea was depositing beach sand? And did the earliest horse with wings appear at the close of that period? Or did an animal with forelimbs developed retain its wings into Miocene time and leave record of its life in an arm of the Tertiary lake? The body is that of a horse with wings attached to the shoulders. The head is unlike that of a modern horse, being much shorter and more rounded, but the parted lips give a glimpse of the teeth of a young horse. If only the feet could be found, I feel assured they would prove that the three-toed horse of ancient time, so abundantly in evidence throughout this region, was possessed of wings and in some way furnished the idea of Pegasus. A few feet further down the canyon are a pair of twisted wings that show the animal to have perished in company with its mate while trying to escape from a sudden flood that rushed down the canyon like a moving wall. After some uneasy discussion about the means of entering the new cave, it was finally decided that the available rope was too short and not of sufficient strength. This was, of course, a disappointment, but not a surprise, as a very peculiar quality in the rope used to enter caves of this kind had come to notice before. The peculiarity is that a rope entirely above suspicion for the safety of a 200-pound man at once weakens and must be condemned when threatened with 100 pounds of woman's weight. Yet there is an implied compliment hidden somewhere about this protective system that tends to reduce the sting of disappointment. So it was agreed to spend the afternoon in the White Onyx Cave, which is generally spoken of simply as the Upper Cave because it occupies a higher level than the Onyx Cave already described, and is supposed to be an extension of the same, although no connecting passage has been discovered. The accompanying friend had not been costumed for caving, but was persuaded to accept a full suit of overalls, which needed the addition of a pick and pipe to make the picture perfect. Unfortunately, a snapshot failed. The entrance is in a perpendicular portion of the canyon wall, but a narrow path that starts some distance away and appears in imminent danger of falling off makes most of the ascent comparatively easy, and the balance is completed by a short ladder whose rounds dip toward the canyon bed in a rather alarming manner, but this only proves the folly of giving too much heed to appearances, for it is strong and firmly fastened to the rocks. Just within the entrance there is height sufficient for standing, but the roof descends suddenly and the walls come near together, reducing the passage to a crawl, and showing that in past times water poured in at this opening and not out as might be supposed. The first chamber entered is the crystal gallery, but it is so nearly filled with great masses of pure white onyx, no standing room remains. Drops of water on portions of the onyx ceiling here are the only moisture remaining in this cave. Slowly, and with no danger and less comfort, we creep over, under, and between great massive beds of the fine white crystalline rock, until at length we enter the ghost chamber where no onyx has been deposited, but where numerous mountain rats have evidently been at home for many years, if we may judge from the enormous quantity of pine needles with which they have carpeted the floor. The walls show small boxwork crumbling to dust, and Ray climbed high into the chimney-like opening above our heads, but reported that it ended suddenly and had no attractions to offer. Coming out, the way was somewhat varied, but more difficult, as the passages through the onyx beds were more irregular and more nearly closed, Onyx Hall being only a fair specimen of the marvelous results achieved here by the persistent regularity of an uninterrupted but slow drip, continued through hundreds of years. It is surprising that in all these heavy beds there is no line or tint or slightest trace of color anywhere, while the other onyx cave, so near as to suggest connection, has a gorgeous variety of rich coloring. The view looking out from the entrance of White Onyx Cave is wonderfully fine, and equally so whether the rain falls or the sun shines, a timely shower giving us an opportunity to enjoy both. Before leaving the ranch, a promise was made by Mr. Sidey to write a short description of the other cave, which he kindly did, and it is here given. He says, quote, "In trailing a deer, I came across a hole on top of a long divide. On throwing a rock down the opening, I could hear it rattling against the walls until the sounds gradually died away, but there seemed to be no bottom to the hole, and I resolved to come again prepared and make explorations. After the snow had gone, my 12-year-old son, Ray, and I, mounted on our trusty horses, Bonnie and Dee, equipped with ropes, candles, hammers, and a pocket full of matches, set out to explore the new cave. It was a beautiful, bright spring morning, and after an hour's hard climbing over fallen timber and rocks, we reached the summit of the mountain. A search of half an hour revealed the opening, which was barely large enough to allow me to pass through. Fastening our ropes securely to a stout log rolled across the chasm, we began to pay it out, and although we did not feel it touch bottom, I started down to explore the length of the rope at least. As I descended, I found the opening gradually widened out to 8 or 10 feet, a sort of inverted funnel-shaped hole with irregular wall, but smooth and affording little footing. As I neared the bottom, I saw the end of the rope was within 4 feet of it, so I landed on terra firma and called to Ray, "All right, come down." Lighting our candles, we found ourselves standing on a mound of pure onyx, and on looking around, could see we were in an immense cavern whose walls sparkled and glittered as if studded with diamonds. Going down 20 feet, we found a smooth-floored room that measured 300 feet in length, 25 feet in width, and 30 feet in height. The walls were solid white onyx lined or banded with pink and golden stripes. The ceiling was arched and draped in fantastic shapes and hung with stalactites innumerable. The room was so large and the drapery and festooning so delicate and beautiful that we were filled with awe and could not speak for a time. At last we started to further explore this wonderland. On going to the farther end of the room, we found a passage leading on. This we followed for 100 feet and found the whole cavern lined with onyx and crystals clear as glass. After loading up with specimens, we retraced our steps, and on reaching the large room we had first entered, we heard a roaring, rumbling noise, an awful noise truly, which filled us with an unknown dread. On approaching the entrance, we saw a stream of water pouring down, completely filling the hole. For a moment we felt like rats caught in a trap, our only way of egress occupied by a stream of water falling straight down 70 feet, and then we wondered how long it would take to fill up the room. Suddenly the thought that there might be an outlet for the water gave us new hope, so we went to see, and sure enough we found a natural water course down through an opening we had overlooked. We gathered up courage once more, and thought the best thing would be something to occupy our time. So we set to work getting out more specimens, and in a couple of hours the water stopped running, and we were ourselves once more. Ray grasped the rope, which was soaking wet, and went up the 70 feet, hand over hand, like a cat. I, being heavier, found it quite different from going down. The rope played whip-cracker with me for some time, and before reaching the top I was covered with bruises. But daylight never appeared so beautiful before. Here we found the cause of so much water. A cloudburst had occurred on the divide, and a large portion of it had poured down the passageway to the cave. We found our horses patiently waiting for us, and night closing in. Mounting, we rode rapidly home, resolved never to venture into this cave again without leaving someone at the entrance to give warning in case of danger. End quote. John F. Sidey. The first specimen taken out was given to us on our first visit to the ranch, and is pure white with a stripe of brilliant golden yellow. Having been invited to give a name to this new find, it seems quite proper, after reading the description of the deluge and seeing the bright bands of color, and considering the hopeful promise of future possibilities, to call it the Rainbow Cave. Stay tuned for the next segment from Cave Regions of the Ozarks and Black Hills by Luella Agnes Owen. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Vanzaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find many interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.